Hello everybody, and welcome to the Q&A session for Helping the Butterfly Hatch for 2024. And we've just had a nice round of check-in to find out who's here and why and from where. And I know that there's also a number of people who said that they'd like to have the recording of the call, so that's also why we're recording it. And please also feel free to share this recording. If you suddenly realize that there are other people that you would have liked to be present for this recording, depending on what comes up during the process. Now, I'm not a person to do a structured sales pitch with you on this call. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm going to see if there are direct questions that you already have. And then if that doesn't take us to the end of the call, then I'll sort of pull up the structure of the course outline for us to have a look at, and then also just look at what your different options are. But I'm very much going to do this in response to the needs of the people who are here, because that's also how we roll with SDE. So to briefly introduce myself, and try and keep it brief because I can ramble. So I started working with young people's rights in a participatory way around the right to a safe environment in South Africa. And I wasn't dealing with education at all, but I was processing hundreds of children in workshops that I had designed and where I trained the facilitators to work with the children in egalitarian participatory ways, so that the kids could actually come out with their wisdom and express their needs and say what needed to happen where they lived. For example, things like, where are the railway tracks not safe to cross, etc. So that gave me two insights. The first one was that the kids had a lot of amazingly wise things to say, and I started relating to them differently than most of the adults around me. And I also got to see how most of the adults around me were relating to them. For example, they'd come to the hall with their teachers, and the difference between the way their teachers interacted and the way the trained facilitators interacted was very, very high contrast, believe me. We had to sometimes boundary the teachers quite strongly. And then the second thing was that none of them were saying anything positive about school. And there was an enormous range of kids, from street child shelters to top private schools, with a bit of everything in between, because we wanted sort of representative samples for some of the stuff. And none of them were saying anything positive about school. Which is when I realized it wasn't just me. Because I had been a school success, and I'd had post-traumatic stress syndrome for a year after leaving school, waking up, sweating and shaking, having dreamed that I had to go back to school on Monday. And I always thought that that was just me. So just after that, I actually stopped that work, because I then became a mother and realized that I needed to find out what kind of education my children were going to have, because it wasn't going to be what I had. So I signed up for a master's in the philosophy of education, and very quickly found that I didn't want to do that either, because I was being steered down the same narrow channel that I'd experienced at school. That I wasn't actually allowed to go in the direction that I needed to go in. At that point, I thought I had to create an education model. But once I released myself from the program and I created reading groups and I went online and I started researching, it only took a little while longer for me to meet my first unschooler, who I thought was a bit nuts. He said, I don't want anyone to teach my children anything. I was sort of like, what do you mean you don't want anyone to teach your children anything? But her children were slightly older than mine. And then I watched the way she was supporting their exploration, that when they got input from an adult, it was at their initiative, because they wanted it and they were ready. And it was a case of, she didn't want somebody taking away that voyage of discovery from them by bringing them the lesson, rather than giving them the opportunity to actually make it their own. So she and I founded something which lasted about a year. We hired a Montessori teacher and said, don't teach anybody anything unless they ask. And then the parents volunteered to bring interesting materials every day, because we just had an empty cottage. And that went very, very well, but it was much too small and too far away. And then we basically spent the next decade or so starting things and learning along the way until eventually, finally, in 2017, we founded Riverstone Village, which has been going strong ever since. And when we founded Riverstone Village, we needed to staff train. And the only answer that I found was come and intern. And there was nowhere to intern on the continent. So I pulled on my previous experience training facilitators to work in participatory ways with children, and the fact that I had crunched my way through the entire starter kit from Sudbury Valley School and a whole lot of other material besides. And I decided that I would create a training program, and word got around that there was now a training program, and I got asked to do it online, and I started doing it online. And here we are 6 years later with something that's built quite a community. And it's really, really beautiful. As I said in the check-in, I learn more every time I go through the course, and the people who've been on the course before also, it just like inside a self-directed education facility, we consolidate our knowledge by passing it along and by sharing with other people who've got different parts of the picture. So one of the things I want to mention right up front is that on this particular cohort in 2024, we've got Sylvie and we've got Max, who are both really solid, beautiful, experienced people. And Max is going to be hosting some sessions in German and also translating some of the materials into German. So for German speakers, you don't have to only rely on me. You can also have some breakout sessions where you can really just relax and, settle into first language, which is always fantastic for insights and being able to deep share. And Sylvie is able to do the same in French. So we have some lovely options here. Now, from there, I think I would like to find out if there are particular questions that people have, so that I can make sure that we respond to those, either by putting them on a list or by going through a structure to see if we get to them. And during that process, I'm also going to mention a few things that came up in the check-in. So yeah, now it's over to you guys. Are there things that you need to know for today?
I'd like to know a few things. I'd be interested to know kind of how many people are likely to be involved in this cohort. Just have a sort of sense of the size of the community and the sort of input and from others. Should I do all my questions or just one?
Yes, no, put them all in. I'll list them and then we'll see.
Okay.
They fit together in a certain way.
I also noticed on the course outline there's a separate sort of heading which talks about horizontal communication. I wasn't sure if that was like a separate course or whether it's part of it within this one. I wasn't certain. I wasn't sure. So I was interested to know about that. I was also interested to know, it was just a quick question really. It was about, I know you've talked a bit about how much the Sudbury Valley model has influenced, and I wasn't sure, I should have done my own research really to try and find out, or could have done, around sort of voting versus consent. And I just wondered kind of where you stand and what on that, because I'm aware of some Sudbury Valley models that are voting, and we don't do that within our consent-based model. And I just had an interest to ask about it. Is there anything else? And I suppose just I'm interested to know kind of how many other people might be. It sounds like there's parents as well as family, as well as people perhaps involved in projects or schools or whatever people want to call them. And so I'm just interested to know kind of how the sort of different people, the ratios of that. And I suppose, and if I'm being upfront, like it's about like feeling like there's enough people that understand the particular challenges that might come up in a setting, running a setting, trying to navigate that. I'm sure they all overlap, and it would just be quite nice to have that solidarity. So those are my questions.
Great question. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to carry on taking questions before I start answering. That way we can also link the different topics together best, but thank you. I've made a note of all of those.
Thank you.
Right. Any other questions that people already have coming in? And hi, Lindsay.
Yeah, I would like to focus especially, or if possible, on parental fears. So if you go new, unusual ways, then a lot of fear comes up, especially with parents, their children failing, and how to attend to these fears. That would be very, very interesting and also important for me.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Any other questions that are already present for you? And let's call anybody. Okay. Then I'm going to dive in, and I'm sure more questions will emerge. Yes, Nicola?
No, the only other question I thought I had was, again, when I looked through the outline, was trying to work out how much space there is for the sort of chat and like collaboration, asking about the content, and how much is delivery, and how much, because I know it might be tricky to always come to all of the sessions, and how that works. Yeah. Right. Great. That's great. All right. Yes. Eileen.
I would like to know more about horizontal communication. And I don't know if those are the right words, but to kind of know where I can draw kind of a line in between, like, just letting the young humans do whatever they want and like still keeping some sort of like structure and like something to hold on to.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions come up before I get started? Okay, then I think let's just quickly deal with horizontal communication, because that'll be done and it's come up twice, right? So when I first started doing these courses, in fact, when we did Riverstone's training, we called in a, I'm trying to remember what the modality is. She's an instructor in the Thomas Gordon, what do they call it? I've forgotten now, but it's one of the variations of sort of connection-based communication that's spun out of nonviolent communication. We got her in to do a training session with us alongside everything we were doing specifically on SDE. And we found that very valuable. And when I started my courses beyond Riverstone Village, I simply said to people, look, go do nonviolent communication or go and do that. Oh yeah, parent effectiveness training and then teacher effectiveness training. I think that's the Gordon ways. I said, go and do that or that. I highly recommend it. And I was getting a lot of feedback from people that they'd been there, they'd done that, it hadn't worked for them, and I couldn't figure out why. So I did the same thing that I had done with self-directed education. And this will also give you a hint to some of your questions about the Sudbury model. What I did with self-directed education is I also tried to drop beneath the model to the DNA underneath the model. And I did the same with nonviolent communication and PET and Rogerian active listening, which I learned in my psychology years. So I dropped beneath all of the forms of those consent-based, connection-oriented communication styles to try and distill the DNA underneath in a way that wouldn't be off-putting for people who were getting stuck on a particular form. So that turned out into what I then came to call horizontal communication. So how the horizontal communication thread runs is that I set up a basic beginner's overview course that comes to about an hour's worth of content. I pop that on Udemy. I give you a voucher for it. You go and work your way through it. When you've worked your way through it, then I add you to a practice group. And that practice group is one of your options every month. You can choose if you don't want to come to it, you don't have to. But then during that group, we focus more on the communication side of things. I highly recommend you come because it gets very, very intertwined. You can't really separate communication from SDE facilitation. So half of the time when we're in a horizontal communication support session, we're actually talking about SDE, just slightly more from the angle of horizontal communication. So I don't know if that helps at all. Is there anything on that topic that isn't clear yet or that you want to expand on before we move elsewhere? Okay. All right.
I have.
Yes.
Is it possible if there is a group of people, for example, that want to dive deeper, or how can they dive deeper, for example, into horizontal communication, specifically to maybe their needs or questions, if there's a group of staff of a school, or for example, how could you make this possible, or is this possible?
I'm not quite sure I'm following the question, because I think that the horizontal communication group sessions every month could be that. It's a question of how deep people want to go, or am I missing a nuance in your question?
Now, if people have now, if a group of people that maybe are in the course have specific topics they want to tackle, the horizontal communication in the communication space, like is it possible to like accommodate that, or how would you do?
Yes. Okay, great. So there's quite a few possibilities. Also because when we get the course going, I'm going to be inviting you all into our Shift community on Discord. And that's got space for forums and interaction that isn't limited to things that I schedule. So it's very, very easy for some of you, for example, to say, I would like to have a practice group with you and you, or who wants to meet around a particular topic of whatever it might be. And then you could send a doodle poll around to those other participants and decide when you wanted to meet to do that. You also constantly, can bring specific topics to the monthly support session, and we can focus on a particular topic just because there's a strong interest in it. And we usually do focus on things that people have brought up, and we find that the same themes often crop up, and there's often common issues. So that, I don't know, does that answer the question? Yeah. So within our Shift community, there's also space for an infinite number of private lounges if you want a lounge to be private. So for example, you could have a lounge just for your particular founders group, or staff group, or staff and parents group, where you could then privately discuss issues relating only to your own space. And we can also create spaces for particular topics or interests or subgroups that are open, but that people can come into if they want to join them. So all of those possibilities are there. And that's also where we then have got the Deutschsprachige and the Francophone, I think it's called, groups as well that people can enter.
Francophone, yeah.
Yeah. As well as PDA Parents Lounge, for example. All of those things are possible. So I think that maybe takes me naturally to the next question around the Sudbury model and democracy and consent, if everyone's happy to go there. So when we looked at doing Riverstone Village based on the Sudbury model, I actually had to send a message to Daniel Greenberg and go, are we a Sudbury if we do this? Because in South Africa, we didn't really have such a positive connotation for the kind of the justice system. It's pretty much a nasty experience under apartheid that we'd all had, of that being very corrupt and oppressive. And on the other hand, there was a very strong movement in South Africa towards restorative justice. And the same thing with democracy. Democracy is a word that can be interpreted in so many ways. So he replied that yes, of course, every community has to embody the principles in the way that makes sense for them. So if you look at UDEC, the European Democratic Education Community, many members are sociocratic schools, free schools, democratic schools, and they each kind of do it their own way. At Riverstone Village, what we do is, I think in our constitution, it just says that, you know, all of us have a say and nobody's vote is stronger than anybody else's vote. And what we do in practice is it's not a majority rule situation. It's an interesting hybrid that's developed over time, because again, the kids and the meeting decide how the meeting runs. So what we've developed over time is that we discuss an issue, somebody proposes something, a resolution or an action or a solution, then it gets seconded by somebody and then it will go to a vote. And then you can either vote for or against, or you can abstain, or you can be absent, which got evolved because sometimes abstentions meant that the thing didn't pass because there was not enough people voting for it. But if you abstain or you vote against, the chair immediately gives you the opportunity to speak to your vote. And you can either say, no, I don't want to speak to my vote. So there's no pressure to consent, which was something that we discussed, you know, when we were looking at it at one stage, that sometimes in a consent-based system, people feel pushed to consent to things that they don't want to consent to, and sometimes they need to just vote against. And if they don't want to speak to their vote against, then it will just pass. But if they want to speak to their vote against, or they want to speak to their abstention, then that's treated as very often an opening to another round of discussion to modify the proposal and the decision. And very, very often we end up with actual consensus, because then we modify and we try to meet all the needs. And sometimes that's not possible, but most often it actually is, and the solution gets improved. So I don't hold anybody on this course to any particular model. The DNA is what matters most. And groups need to find their own way in terms of what particular expression they're going to give to that DNA. But what I'm really trying to provide is this is what came up in the check-in, the foundational concepts that are often missing. Because like with the communication styles, people often come in and relate to the particular form that a thing is taking. Like, for example, the nonviolent communication's got phrasing that you do. And you can weaponize that and you can use it to be extremely violent and abusive, is what I discovered when I started looking at it. But using the correct phrasing in nonviolent communication doesn't guarantee that you will be nonviolent when you're using that. What matters is the foundational concepts underneath what you're using and why. So I try to provide an opportunity to really internalize and anchor that understanding of what's foundational and why, which is also where this becomes a path of personal growth. Because
John Manner journeying out past the...
Hello? I think it's just I'm just going to mute there. I think that's an accident. It's often I've just lost my thread though. Yeah, so the systemic thinking that was mentioned in the check-in is that the systems thinking is so pervasive and it's all around us. It kind of sticks in the brain and keeps pulling us back to mainstream expectations until we've made what I call the shift. And that's why my address and my community are called what they are. Because when that shift happens, we actually internalize that kind of self-directed horizontal way of being. We heal out our own school trauma to some extent, and we leave what some psychologists call the consensus trance, where everybody thinks a certain way, and we actually move into our empowerment, and that can't be undone. That cannot be reversed. So when that shift happens, that's when people really get grounded and rooted, and find it easier to then naturally do things that are in keeping with that DNA. And those questions around does this fit and doesn't this fit then take on a very different flavor. Because before then, we often have the problem that I think, Bianca, you experienced, where people feel that to be democratic means that we should consider all of the options as possible. And if you are saying, no, this is actually how it needs to be, they feel like you're maybe just being hardcore and undemocratic, and you should be more negotiable. Whereas you're actually a stage of understanding where you grasp that some of these options actually violate the DNA and there's no point. You know, it's just not going to work. So that's also where I really like people on the course to be able to share as much as possible with parents, with co-founders, with other staff, that as many people as possible in the group actually grasp that DNA, make that shift, so that they can anchor that culture. That just makes it very, very easy for everybody to feel what makes sense. So questions or responses or your own comments based on that topic before we move on. Something you'll learn about me is I'm happy to leave silence sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know if you finished that thought, but you were
Go for it.
talking about how nonviolent communication, the phrasing can actually turn out to be violent.
Yes.
And then we had the interaction. And then a question I had is, I think I remember you saying before, the horizontal communication, it can be a standalone course that you can
Yes.
do. Am I right?
Yes, it can. That is one of your options. Sometimes people do come on just for horizontal communication. That's also why I try to keep it as a separate core. But as I say, it's not really possible to separate it. And very few people come on my course to do that without being in some way involved in SDE. So it usually makes sense that they get a bit integrated. But that's also one of the reasons why I put the pre-recorded foundational material onto Udemy, so that people who only just wanted to do a little bit of that could just kind of get started and then go and practice it in their groups without needing to come on course support. Okay, any other thoughts or questions before we move on? Right. Variety, quantity and variety of people in the course. I just need to sneeze. Apologies. Okay. Oh. Lucky 3. Okay, so I don't know how many people will be on the course until we finish sign up, which will be, we need to make a deadline because we're starting next week. So I can't tell you exactly, because what often happens around now is that some people sign on and then suddenly their associates sign on with them. I don't know why. Sorry. Perhaps there's something in the air suddenly. Okay. So sometimes people jump on at the last second, and sometimes people who've been planning to come don't. So I can't tell you how many there'll be. Past experience suggests anywhere between 10 and 40. Right. In terms of the ratios, I also won't be able to tell you up front, because I don't know who will sign in permanently and who will not. It would be very unusual to have a very, very skewed spread. There's usually a decent spread between unschooling parents and people running settings. Sometimes Sudbury, sometimes ALC, sometimes undefined. There's definitely a variety of people in our shift community, because also you don't have to leave our shift community once you've finished the course. So it's also always possible to draw on the relationships and the wisdom of the people who are still there. And often we do sort of networking where a particular thing comes up for somebody and I say, oh, I think, you know, can I put you in touch with so-and-so? So that we also have sort of a fairly large network of people who are really happy to be, you know, contacted or do a bit of mentoring. So I don't know if that answers that. Any more questions or comments on that before I move on?
So already, just from the people that I know that are signed into the course, there is already quite a variety of parents. There are even some people that are part of a group I'm part of that are setting up a community where STE is in the center of of a living community, an intentional living community where STE is in the center. And there are, like Bianca is working at the school, and there are some parents. There's Eileen, is actually my daughter, so who works with young people. So I guess already there is quite a variety.
Yeah, there is. And then of course there's also just the experience from the people who are have continuity with this course, such as yourself, Max, and Sylvie, and myself, and Bianca, that we also have in our minds all of the examples of things, you know, that happened last year in the course from this place. And so it becomes quite a rich kind of oral base of wisdom share. So in terms of the actual session space for chat and collaboration versus delivery, it sort of depends on the group to some extent. There's quite a lot of content that I need to deliver. And if you have to rely on the recordings, there'll be plenty of content delivered that you can use in the recordings. I also like to have space for chat and collaboration. My sessions are not usually very breakout room oriented. Sometimes with some groups, they become breakout room oriented, and that's fine. But for many groups, they don't want to miss out on, you know, the sharing that's happening in the other room. So we tend to go more plenary. Generally, my structure would most often be that there's going to be a check-in where people can raise stuff, and some content delivery and some discussion of that would sort of be the most typical format. And then, of course, with our shift community, and I also offer a lot of extra resources. So I'm going to say this again, but I really have to get this through to people who are a bit perfectionistic. I will probably give you more than you are going to use, because some people really like to have more content, and some people are more drawn to particular areas in the content. And so please don't feel that this is sort of a schoolish course where you're supposed to cover the entire curriculum. Trust yourself and engage with what calls you. And I don't take away your access to the content, so you can always spend the next while catching up. And Sylvie's saying there, we've also done follow-up meetings outside of the main content to discuss specific topics and situations. Yes, absolutely. In fact, Sylvie also has just done 2 amazing calls, one last year and one recently, on how her family budgets, unschooling budgeting style, which is beautiful, and also gives a nice example for settings, you know, in terms of how things can even be done. So these topics come up, and that just came out of something she said in a session and people being interested. then we can go down that rabbit hole together. So it is very self-directed in that sense. But there's basic content that I've learned that we pretty much need to cover with every group. Right. Anything else on that before we go to the last two questions that I've got listed?
Diana, I'm just curious, how does the presence of parents alter the experience of the course if you're just a parent and you're not an educator? I mean, if it makes any difference or not?
No, I don't know. Does anybody want to say what their experience is? I would say no. I mean, I think, you know, every individual's experience of the course is going to be different. I don't know that it makes an enormous difference if you're a parent or a professional facilitator. Yes, Bianca.
Yeah, what I always find is as a facilitator in a school, I find it very, very enriching having parents on board who are self-teaching their children or do whatever besides school. So I find that amazing. I have learned a lot from parents who are self-teaching or are in any way doing self-directed education with their children. So it's great.
And I think the opposite is also true. Yes, go for it, Lindsay.
Sorry, I'm a parent facilitating self-directed education in my family. So technically homeschooling in the US. And I attended the course a little bit last year before something impeded my presence, but I found it so helpful because I think we're all sort of, there's the same impulse behind it and the same sort of value, because it really is, to me, it's more of a community impulse. So my kids don't attend any type of school, but we do community organizations, and I do my best to weave those values and impulses into our work as a family and in the community. So I found it very helpful.
Great. Yeah, exactly. I think that as you say, the impulse is the same, the DNA is the same. It's just, again, it's a different expression of that same fundamental, foundational stuff. Yeah. It's a way of being. And then that way of being creates your doing in whatever setting you're going to be in. Yeah. Okay. Then the next two questions we won't go into in detail because they are really questions that I'm going to answer by saying, yes, we will engage with this lots during the course. So those two questions are, you know, how do you deal with parental fears? So that's going to seem like a topic that's relevant for the settings. How do you deal with the fears of the parents of the kids that you're signing up and their anxieties? But when we're dealing with how do you as a setting deal with those fears, we're also dealing with the parents' own fears who are unschooling. And we're also dealing with how do you deal with your mother-in-law's fears? How do you deal with your best friend's fears and judgments of what you're doing with your children? Again, the foundational issues are the same, and then it's just there's different expressions of these issues happening in people's lives. And we'll definitely be engaging with that lots on the course because it's key. Yeah. Again, there's a few different things that we could mention there briefly. You can simply be on the course and engage with that, and that will help you support those people differently. You can also use some of my foundational materials to suggest to them that they engage with some of my foundational materials. You can also run a group using my foundational materials with other people to discuss and to help them kind of make that shift. Okay. All right. And together with that, the other question there from Eileen, drawing the line between the freedom and the structure. Again, I'm going to have to answer you that we'll be engaging with that very actively on the course. because it's not something that I can answer you in terms of do this rather than do that. As we delve into those foundational principles, it'll be easier for you to feel out. When do people need more scaffolding, or you know, when do you need to set a limit, or how do you do that in a consent-based collaborative way? You know, that's something that you'll be doing on the course for sure, getting more confident about that. So I'd just like to answer it very briefly with the concept that came to us from A.S. Neal, who founded Summerhill School, that he said it's freedom, not license. And what he meant by license is you can do anything you like. Sometimes people interpret freedom as you can do anything you like. Whereas what we say in this form of education is it's like my freedom ends where it starts getting in the way of your freedom, and where your freedom and my freedom are going to conflict, that's where we've got to start figuring things out, because that's where it's about being horizontal. Everybody matters. So we can't just say, well, my freedom is more important than yours. So very often that's where we draw the lines around structure. When structure is naturally created, it tends to come out of human beings being together and the structure that they need in order to make that work for everybody, rather than some kind of structure that we bring in from the outside because it's a good thing, sort of idea. Does that help at all? Yeah, great. Okay, so we are most of the way through this call already. We've still got a bit of time. What's still not clear, or should I go through like the nuts and bolts of signing up for this and that and what your options are, or are there other things that have come up so long? Nicola?
I'd just like to know, it may come into the bit you're about to do about the qualification, because I know we've got facilitators. I don't facilitate, but do more management, but the facilitators, I think, might be interested in that.
Okay, so there's two
yes, because I think that's, yeah.
Oh, sorry, you were dropping out there and I thought you were finished. So you're talking about the certification, that second option to add that. So there's two possibilities there, and I don't know which one it's going to be yet. Unfortunately, I was hoping it would be clearer by now, but it's going to take a while. So the first possibility is that it's just going to be my certification process that I'm going to run people through, and the certificate will be backed by me, right? The other one that I'm hoping for, but I cannot promise for this year, and I'll only really know in the second half of the year, is that we can make it a level 3 and 4 in the British system through the Open College Network. But it's really not clear whether that's going to be possible for this year or not, because it requires it to not just be my course. We actually have to ground it in an organization, and there are a couple of possibilities there. So we are busy actively looking at that, but it's quite possible that even, I don't know exactly how it would work, but what I'm going to be doing would be compatible with that. So it might even be possible to convert it later if it doesn't happen in time. Now, I don't know. I can't tell you, but I can tell you that at the least. So roughly what you'd be looking at is you'd be looking at doing the course, and then the course ends in the middle of November. And then if you're doing the certification, you'd have another month, which would be an interactive process with other people doing the certification. It would involve some documentation, either writing or using some other form to document. And then there would be a sort of a facilitated interactive peer review process in the group. And then that would lead to sort of a final offering that you would be putting in. And then we would have a couple of experienced people also going over that during December. When you finished in the middle of December, we'd have a couple of experienced people going through that in December and, you know, coming back with their feedback as well. And then the certificates would go out in mid-January is what you'd be looking at. So it would be as self-directed as possible while still being credible for people who don't understand self-directed education. Basically, it's similar to the way we do the Riverstone diploma. So we get that balance between self-assessment, peer interactive assessment, and sort of knowledgeable feedback from someone who has the capacity to do that. Yeah, balance of those. So why we also started doing that is just because we've gotten to the point now where there are people who've done my course who are getting hired in places around the world, and it can just be handy to have some sort of idea. Did they just, just listen to a couple of the recordings and never show up on my course, or did they really engage with my course? At this point, there's no way to say for my past cohorts which of those is true. So it's nice for people to be able to have that extra layer of understanding how much did this person actually engage and internalize. Yeah. Nicola, did you want to add?
No, I think that's great. Yeah, no, I just wanted to get a bit of clarity because I think that could be useful for some. Yeah, I think would benefit some people, particularly. Yeah, thank you.
Look, especially if we can get it, that's also where I'd really like to get it to the 3 and 4, also in terms of changing the public perception of this form of education. So the 3 would be what I've discussed there, and then the 4 would be you would then have your practical component. And then you would need the children to vote for you in your practical component. They'd need to say whether you passed.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else there? Okay. So here are your options. What I haven't said until now is that you are also welcome to join the start of the group if you don't want to do the full training. The first 3 months is more of what's called deschooling, but it's really about that foundational concept shift, personal growth, grounding experience. And then the later months, we go more and more into theory and practice for facilitation. So some people just want the shift. If you want to just come on for the shift, you can. That's where I've put up the PDF as a self-study option. The When School's Not Cool and the 8 Ahas are kind of a DIY of those 3 months. It's always much more powerful if it's interactive and in a group, and we don't stick then strictly to the content in the PDFs, but it's similar principles that we're going to explore. So that is also an option. Otherwise, we've still got the 20% referral thing open, but I mean, we're getting to the point we have to close everything because we need to finalize now. So this is your last chance if you want 20% discount to refer somebody else, and then you both get your 20% discount. So we can still leave that open for another day or 2, but then we need to wrap it up quickly yeah, get final. And what else? You can pay in a lump sum. You can pay monthly. You can pay through Patreon. You can pay through PayPal. You can negotiate with me if you need to. I do rely on the money. I'm not saying, oh, don't worry about paying me. But at the same time, my bigger motivation is making sure that we see SDE best practice and people really thriving. So I am always happy to talk. If it means you're not going to do it, then we need to talk. Anything else? Oh, yeah, just to say, you could encourage some of your associates who are not going to do the full course to come and join that first part. It'll be a big investment on your part to a big return on investment, I should say, to have more people actually make the shift and be helping you anchor the culture. And together with that, there is also that option of you know, of running some discussion groups with them later in the year on that foundational material.
One of my questions was, sorry, it's all right to just ask.
Yes.
I think it was, I had some reticence perhaps about engaging the rest of our community, because I was particularly aware of the later parts of the course that what would be really helpful for our facilitator team was be able to talk quite candidly about what's challenging and what's difficult. And that, of course, when you've got all of your whole community, we are very honest with our community, but there is and parents and have some great relationships, but it was just, yeah, I kind of was, it's also having that, trying to decide whether you want to have a space where you can grapple with things that perhaps you don't want to talk about with the whole community. So I'm a bit torn. There was that I was thinking about, and then also thinking about, I mean, we've always got more to learn in terms of unschooling, but I think the bit when it's challenging in terms of making it work financially, it's like, I know the bit that our facilitators, we've done a lot of looking at the bigger, you know, the sort of DNA and like why we're doing this and what we're doing. It's the bit that really makes me go, is the bit where it's looking more at the facilitation and the you know, like how to grapple with that. And I realize we've got to do the whole thing, but I just, yeah,
sorry,
it's,
you know,
no, I'm sort of saying it out loud, almost like,
yeah.
so that I can talk about it with my team. It's like, this is about like everyone has to keep revisiting this stuff. I know I need to, but it's, yeah,
you do need to keep revisiting stuff, because it always goes deeper, and the deeper it goes, the more the facilitation practice will become, like I said, sort of more of an obvious extrapolation of what you've just refreshed. And the other thing is that we often don't realize when we've got a few gaps somewhere, or when one of our colleagues has a few gaps somewhere. And that's where it's just really helpful as a team to go through those foundational things again from a different angle, because it gives a frame of reference. Everybody's on the same page. Oh, but this problem that we're having right now, do you remember that session on that example there? I think it applies here. You know, that's just very, very useful. So you could, I don't know how many of your parents would stay onto the last section, you know, because usually the parents who stay on that are the parents who are, you know, realizing that they want to become volunteers, and then they need to do that. But, you know, it is also possible. I don't like to do one-on-ones unless I have to, because they're just not an effective use of my time to duplicate what I'm saying to people and not share it. But groups, you know, there's always that possibility for separate group sessions, either for just your staff group or for just selected people to have a separate session. That is always possible. Yeah. And within our Shift community, it's beautiful the way that it can be divided up and integrated. So everybody's got access to the collective spaces, and then the private spaces are thoroughly private. Nobody can even see them in their menu. So, you know, that kind of makes a really nice container. Right. Other questions? Otherwise, we're going to go into a relaxed checkout, because there's only about 10, maybe as much as 20 minutes left. Yeah. Which we don't have to use if everybody's got enough to digest. I'm just going to check the chat here. Just got my notes in the way here. All right. No, it's just basically people running out of time and leaving. Would one be able to go through that process specifically for certification in facilitating SDE for PDA? Oh, I like that, Sylvie. Let's do that. Why not? Absolutely. Definitely. Of course. Of course. Of course. Yeah, you be one of the assessors. You have to give yourself your own certificate. Yeah. yeah, look, that certification for facilitating SDE for PDA, I think is maybe even more necessary because there's just such a demand for that, and people really need to be sure that the person knows their stuff. I've had too many complaints of people who've had other spaces train an au pair who's supposed to be able to accommodate PDA, and they can't actually, and now you've paid for that person to be sourced and trained, and now they're no good. So yeah, we would want to look at that. Okay. All right, well, if nothing else comes to mind, then let's nail down some timelines and say that it's now the 3rd and we're starting on the 9th. So it's a good idea to complete your sign up by Wednesday. That will be the 6th.
Are we starting on the 9th or the 10th? I have the 10th on my diary.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's the 10th. Sorry, I
Okay,
get
just
disoriented.
checking.
It's the Sunday. We're going to basically do Sunday nights this year, unless there's a reason to not do the Sunday night. And we'll be doing at least 3 a month, but that's going to depend on, you know, that 4th one is for the PDA. So if you're doing PDA as well, you know, probably best to be available for 4. And they're all optional, you know. I don't mind if you. There are people who also, because of time zones, mostly do recordings. So just let's go there very briefly, because there are a couple of people on this call who are in difficult time zones for this course, and you're absolutely welcome to just listen to the recordings, and then I would strongly encourage you to interact on the Our Shift community so that there is interaction. But then you can actually do it asynchronously. You can use voice chats as well as text chat on Discord. So you can leave messages and people can get to know you as well.
And maybe something else to notice, the recordings, because they are on YouTube, they are subtitled. You have the automatic subtitles. So for people not speaking English as their native language, that's also helpful to revisiting or just watch the recordings and watch them with subtitles.
Yeah,
so that
great.
helps too.
I'd love feedback on how accurate the other language subtitles are, because I'm never sure. I know sometimes English, you see some quite interesting things in automatic subtitles. Just a quick note about the YouTube, they are not public recordings. So if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see I've got a handful of recordings. There's actually hundreds and hundreds of recordings in my YouTube channel, but they're only accessible to the people who have the links. So it means that you can go back to the recordings and review them. And I trust you to use, you know, a certain standard of discretion and consent in terms of sharing with people who weren't on the course. But they're not searchable and findable by the average public person. So yeah, but the parents on your facility won't have access to your discussion call that we have in the course. Yeah. Okay.
And I would like to add, I will review the subtitles in German if enough people actually need that and sign up, because that takes a lot of time. And I will only do it if there's enough demand for that.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the basis on which you want to offer the German support?
So I will offer additional support for the German-speaking community. To participate in that, I have a Substack, and simply become. There are 2 tiers of subscription models. And if you subscribe to the more expensive one, then you will have access to the additional content and translations.
Great.
And yeah, around 95 euros is the thing. And you get also the additional benefit in supporting me in my work with the Substack, where you find even more resources and stuff that also most of the resources are, nearly all of the resources are freely available, and some are also in English, some are also with Jana, some are with colleagues. There are some also interesting for the whole community, all the stuff we did about dyslexia, for example, and just to give one example. And there are lots of translations also of other people that are commonly known in SD, like Peter Gray and Ian Cunningham, and stuff we do together in the community.
Yeah, and your podcasts.
And podcasts, of course. Hours and hours of podcasts.
Yeah. And you'll also just be supporting an amazing networker who makes his way through Europe in his vehicle and connects people and inspires people. And yeah, it's like, I just love what you do, Max. So yes, please do subscribe to Max's Substack and yeah, enjoy the German. Sylvia, I don't know, do you want to say anything? It's up to you.
Sure. So I'm happy to support discussions in French, whether it's people, located anywhere in the world, will figure out a time that works best for everyone to gather, or multiple times if we have to. And I'll do it on a session by session base. So most likely we'll be covering specific topics based on whatever is needed at the time. But I'm not on Substack yet. Actually, my kids are trying to push me to start a blog and do those things. So maybe I'll find the time to do that. But at this point, I'm not there yet. But I'm very happy to support discussions in French if it's needed. If there's enough demand, we'll figure out a good time together and have those discussions. Looking forward to it.
And then you're also available for PDA support one-on-ones, right? SDE for PDA
I am
one-on-one.
as well. Yes, I do that already. And so if anybody needs extra support in, implementing SD or tweaking SD for their PDAers, I'm happy to help with that as well. Because I've seen the benefits of it.
Yeah, and you'll discuss the rates with people who contact you directly.
Exactly. Yeah, I try to have like a sliding scale based on what your income is, and not necessarily your income, but your bandwidth is. So, so we can discuss the specific rates. Yes.
Great. All right,
Thank
then
you.
I think that probably brings us to a close. So please, if you would like to sign up, if you can finalize your sign up by the end of Wednesday, because I do need a couple of days to get you into our Shift community. Some people have never ever been in Discord before, and Discord becomes very, very empowering once you know your way around. But when you first arrive there, it can be a little bit confusing if you're not used to it. Discord was designed for young gamers, and they find it apparently very intuitive and easy to use, whereas old people like me, I now find it very intuitive and easy to use and very empowering, but I certainly didn't when I first arrived. So I need a couple of days to get you in there and get you organized, because that's where our calls are going to be. They will be live in the Discord. One of the big advantages of that is that you can start when everybody's in the call and you don't have to wait for me. So if you want to arrive half an hour early and catch up with people, or stay for an hour afterwards and keep chewing on the topics, the channel is there, and you just carry on or start early. And it's not quite like a Zoom that I'm going to now close, and then that'll be that. Right. And yeah, if you're watching this recording, or if you're here and you suddenly get a new question that comes up that we didn't cover, just drop me a line, and I will then maybe share the answer if it's relevant to more people. I'll share that with everybody that new questions come up. And yeah, do feel free. This recording, as I said at the start, is going to be public. So you can share this with other people who you now suddenly realize, oh my gosh, I should have invited so-and-so onto this call. You can share this with them. Let's see, there's one more chat thing there. Let me just see. Oh, yes. Yes, Sylvie's just saying Discord has so much flexibility. That's ironically one of the things that's daunting at first when you first arrive, is how much flexibility there is. But it quickly becomes an opportunity. Right. Then are we done? Shall I stop the recording? We can have a quick checkout. All right. Going once. Okay, going twice.
I just want to say quickly that I've done this course in full twice already, and I always learn so much. And I've been unschooling for over a decade now, still deschooling some aspects of my life because, you know, some of my childhood was quite difficult and traumatic. So I had a lot of deschooling to do on my end. So you won't regret joining these sessions. I think the community portion of it is absolutely incredibly valuable. Like there's so much that we learn from being in community with others who do the same work of deschooling and implementing SDE, that that in itself is worth, you know, more than I can express for sure. It's been a fantastic journey working with you all. So thank you, Jenna, for setting this all up.
Yeah, thank you for being part of it. It is, you know, self-directed education is in its essence something that is community oriented and lives in a community space, and it just really it reaches its best when we've got that, and when that's bigger than just our own immediate surroundings. So yeah. All right, with that, I'm going to stop the recording, and thank you if you watched the recording. Hope you'll be in touch, and the rest of us are going to have a bit of a relaxed checkout.